This is a masterclass on selling to the modern B2B buyer in 2022. We all know times have changed. What it takes to sell and onboard customers today is very different than the last few years. And we have an expert panelist here to help share some tips and tricks and learnings and insights to hopefully guide those, sales leaders, founders, reps, et cetera, out there who are tuning in to guide the way. So I'll stop talking for a couple seconds and I'll let folks introduce themselves. Maybe we'll kick off, Mike, if you kick off introducing yourself, and then I'll kind of pass the mic along.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Mike Harness. I am the VP of Sales for the Americas at G2.
Awesome. And Sahil, what's your story?
Yeah, I'm Sahil, CEO and account executive at Bravado.
Amazing. And Ben?
Hey everyone, Ben Pearson, head of sales, go-to-market, and also account executive at Navattic.
Awesome. And I'm Ross, CEO and co-founder at Accord, also SDR, AE, CSM, et cetera. And really excited to share some learnings with this awesome expert panel group on selling to modern B2B buyers. So if folks we want to make this very engaging and collaborative and more as a conversation with the audience involved, with everyone out there involved, not just us here. So if you have burning questions, I believe there's a Q&A tab in Zoom here. If you want to throw some of your questions in there at the start, we'll kick off with the first question and hopefully you have some awesome questions to kick off from in there from the audience. So the first question, how have buyers' expectations changed recently? And what is causing this shift? Ben, maybe I'll let you kick off with this one.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, when I was thinking about this question, there were really two things that we had come up with that we've noticed. The first one that we've noticed at Navattic is prospects, generally speaking, seem to have less of an appetite for that more traditional sales process, which we sort of all know what that means, right? It's the execute a CTA, chat with an SDR, get qualified, go to an AE. Maybe a week later, I'm finally seeing a demo. And now it's been a week since I wanted to see the product, I'm actually seeing the product. And I think this is a result of two things, sort of like what we've seen is, number one, prospects are way more educated coming into conversations than they ever have before, right? They have the access to things like G2. They have the ability to check out your competitors. They can see pricing. If they're using interactive demos or video content on your website, chances are they've already sort of clicked through and somewhat qualified themselves already. So I think the expectation going in these calls that we've seen is prospects no longer are really starting from square one. Generally speaking, they're coming to these conversations expecting to be square three or square four. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen oftentimes is sales processes might not also be sort of like speeding up at that level of prospects education. So that's really the first one, is there's not really that appetite to go through that traditional sales process because of the legwork they're putting in like on the front end. Yeah. And the other piece that I thought was really, really interesting, which shout out to Natalie from our marketing team for providing this info, is the buyer demographic has changed. 45% of SaaS buyers today are in the 25 to like 30-year-old range, which takes one to know one. Like, what do we know about 25 to 30-year-olds? Their attention spans are really short. They are used to buying processes that are like right at their fingertips, very easy. Like, I could buy a car on the website right now, like on Carvana, and have it delivered tomorrow. So I take those expectations for buying and I apply them to other areas of my life, including SaaS sales. So if I'm interested in evaluating Accord, I want to be able to check out Accord, look at competitors, look at pricing, like do my research at first, and then go into these conversations a little bit more educated and start that process at a different level than maybe we would have started 5 years ago.
Totally. I think some great insights there, especially my big takeaway that they're not starting from square one anymore. And yeah, I like that expectations have changed, especially based on the B2C world in the last few years, right? Expect to make these big purchases right away, get all the information. Why is it any different for debatably a bigger decision where you can get judged on by your peers and boss and all that kind of stuff, even higher stakes there. So I'll pass it off to Sahil to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for starters, I agree with what Ben said, but I'm going to take a slightly different tack on it just so we don't like say, oh yeah, we all agree with each other. Let's make it a little bit more fun. Most SaaS buyers don't know what they're doing. They don't really know what the technology does. They don't really know how to evaluate it. yet because of things like G2 and this whole like product-led growth and kind of like this internet awareness, whatever, you know, Ben said, people think they know. And I think that's causing a really interesting, you know, it's like the old thing about like just dangerous enough to think you know what you're doing, but not dangerous enough to be competent at it. Like that's where most SaaS buyers are, which is to say that I can't tell you how many people I get on the phone with that think they know what Bravado Talent does. And I can only speak about like my experience, right?
Mhm.
They think they know what it is because they've read about it, because they've seen emails, they've talked to somebody, whatever. And then we get into the process, I realize that like, you know, if I'm talking to, let's say a VP of sales, they might have some understanding, but they're missing like a big piece of the talent side. If I'm talking to a VP of talent, they know all the talent stuff, but they don't understand sales. And I think we've long talked about salespeople being consultants and consultative. You know, like we throw these words around. I think it's really coming to a head today where you have to think of yourself in the same way that like someone at Bain or McKinsey or BCG treats their clients, which is like the client doesn't know what they're doing. If they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't be hiring a consulting firm. They're hiring a consulting firm because they're like, teach me what to do. Our process is broken. I approach sales the same way, which is to say that if a VP of sales comes to me and wants to have a conversation about Bravado Talent, I assume you don't know how to recruit, because if you knew how to recruit, you wouldn't be coming to me. So now my job isn't to sell you Bravado Talent, it's to teach you how to recruit, which of course could include Bravado Talent or could not include Bravado Talent. But ultimately my job is to be like, this is how recruiting's done. And if you as a salesperson aren't an authority in what it is that you're selling, then you're useless. But if you're really good at what you sell and you know the space and you can actually guide the buyer forward, then you're priceless. And I think the world is like, historically salespeople, Ben, I loved what you said. You're like, you know, buyers are, you know, starting on square 3, square 4. I think from a purchasing standpoint, maybe not. From a how much help they need, definitely. Which is like, they need a lot of help. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know the difference between TriNet versus Zenefits versus, like, they don't know, you know, like your job as a salesperson is to teach them because they're just reading random things on the internet, looking for buzzwords, maybe read some comp chart somewhere and are trying to make a guess. And that's how I see it.
Can I tack something onto
Jump in
that?
there, yeah.
I would say I somewhat agree with that. What I would say is they might not know what they're doing, but they do know what problems they're trying to solve, right? And that, I think that's the starting point that all salespeople need to take into account is these individuals are saying, hey, I have all these open heads in sales. I am trying to solve that problem. Now it's up to us as the modern sellers, right, to do really quality discovery and figure out how do we help them. Does our solution help solve that problem? But you have to connect to what they are trying to solve. And I think that's the biggest sort of gap right now is they come in, to your point, Sahil, a lot of information out there, a lot of things that they can glean from the internet to get from sort of a research phase into a consideration phase. It's then our job to sort of guide them through and figure out whether our solution fits with the problem they're trying to solve, and then what facets, how do we shape a solution in total for them so that we are actually solving their problem.
I know you've got other questions, Ross, but I really want to add something to
that.
Yeah,
go for it. Yeah.
I think because I would like to be the counterexample to that. What you just said, Michael, I feel like in an ideal world that is true. This may not be true for anyone else. It's definitely true for me that doesn't apply to me. I'll give you a real example. So we run a community at Bravado that's like think like Reddit for salespeople, right? And we were having problems with trolls, right? People would come in and post all sorts of stupid shit and it would be super annoying. And like, we would try to ban people and we'd have to give warnings. And like, the community got big enough to where it was difficult to police. And so we eventually like posted this message in the war room that was like, yo, here's this new set of policies that we're going to enforce. And meanwhile, I'm scrambling to try to hire content moderators on the back end to try to actually enforce the policy. I post a message. The next day I get an email from a sales rep at a company called Sift Science. And her message was, hey, Sahil, saw your message in the war room. We work with Reddit to help them automatically solve this problem. We can also do the same thing for you. Here's how it works. Do you want a demo? And we bought the product like in a week, you know? And so I didn't even know there was a technical solution to something that seemed like a fundamentally human problem to me, where I was trying to figure out, like, I don't want to be like, you know, the gazpacho or whatever, turning around and like trying to like, you know, ban free speech on my platform. But I also don't want people to come on and like be posting like spamware on there. And so like, I couldn't figure out what the solution was. Turns out there was a technical solution that had been used by tens of thousands of companies that I'd never even thought of. And so, you know, I think, again, buyers think they know, right? You're like, well, Sahil had this problem of how to solve content moderation or whatnot. But I would have never thought that was a technical problem. I was just thinking it was like a human.
Well, that's a solution. I think she understood your problem, right? She was an industry expert who had context on similar platforms. This is why I love sales. It's like, she's here trying to get value from your platform, all this kind of stuff. And she's just like living sales so much. She's like, that resonated with me. Seeing this post was literally sounded like the problems that my customers talk about on a daily basis. And I was able to, even without Sahil even saying, this is the type of thing I'm looking for, I matched the problem with the solution. I think that's such a missing piece in sales today. And what people, you know, kind of bring it back to selling to modern buyers, that's what you need to be doing today. You need to be up-leveling yourself from, I'm sharing the features, I'm sharing the functionality, because you can't get that before. Now that's, you don't spend it. People talk about that it's bad. I don't think it's bad to know about features and functionality and technically how it works. You need to assume that people have a baseline on that. What they don't have is the deep understanding of the different types of solutions to these problems, right? And they've gone deep on hopefully understand the market, the insights, what works best for you. And I think that's a great example of tying both of those, right? Like, you can't assume that your customer, Sahil, like what you're saying, you can't assume that these buyers deeply understand the solutions to their problems. But if you're a great seller, you're going to understand the problem so well, you're going to be able to map those. And that's, I think that's like the golden way of, you know, selling to buyers today.
And by the way, kudos to that salesperson, because Sahil, you did recognize, hey, I have a content moderation problem. I think I solved this through hiring a human being, when in reality, there's this other option out there. And that person hit you right at the time when you had that need. You were sort of in market for that solution, and they hit you at the right time, got the sale. So kudos to them.
Yeah, definitely. I love that sales rep. She's awesome. And, you know, the power of intent data, right? So I think
It is.
Exactly. Well, not to, you know, the great conversation here, but to move it to some of the audience questions, because we have about 5 or so here. One that stood out to me was less so specifically about this question, but I think what it'll open up to this discussion. I've had good success sharing Notion docs via screen share versus doing a formal deck. Thoughts? Does that seem unprofessional? I think this loops in really well with this theme of selling to modern B2B buyers and being more collaborative and transparent and all these things, and feeling much more real, like a conversation than just going through a process. So Ben, would love to maybe start with your thoughts on this and then get the rest of the group's opinions.
Yeah, my initial thought on this, truthfully, in the way we try to structure our sales process internally is my question in like true sales form is following up with the question of this is, do they like it? Have you asked your prospects? Have you asked your customers, hey, when you were going through this process, what did you think about this? What was helpful? What did you not like? These are the types of questions we're asking our customers so we can continue to hone in our sales process, because frankly, every company and product is so different that if you try to just copy and paste, for example, maybe like what G2 is doing and bring it over to Navattic, it might be a disaster. You know, like Sahil, what you mentioned with your sales process makes total sense. It's very different than like what we're experiencing. So I think it's really, really important in this scenario, like what I would say to the Notion doc versus deck. Traditionally, I've been like a don't do a deck guy. But my response there would be, you should simply ask for feedback. What do they think? Is it helpful? Is it solving their problems? Is it meeting their expectations for the call? And these are all kinds of questions you can have with existing customers. Obviously not maybe with like, if Ross is a prospect, I'm not going to ask him at the end of the call, but if Ross becomes a customer that we have a good relationship with in a couple of months, circling back and saying, how was the sales process? Where can we improve? Where did you find us? These sorts of questions that we are hyper-focused on at Navattic to help shape what we're doing on the front end. So maybe somewhat of an incomplete answer answering with the question, but that's kind of how I would approach it.
It depends is always a good answer.
Yeah. I will say one of the evolutions that we've made is we do begin with a deck. So we have sort of a first vision call is what we call it with prospects. but within that deck, we have built in optionality, right? So the option to, hey, do you want to move through this and just get the, traditional song and dance on G2? Or can we go live to site and practically sort of talk about the environment on G2, what G2 is doing, how you would consume the solution, et cetera. So, a lot of times we are giving that fork in the road, and allowing that prospect to decide how do you want to consume this information? How do you want to guide this conversation together? So yeah, I think back to Ben's point, it's sort of like figuring out how do they want to receive it, and then trying to adapt your style and your approach to that particular prospect based on what they're looking for.
For sure. And Sahil, it depends. Is it definitely no deck? Is it deck? What's your opinion here?
Yeah, I think that the less time you spend screen sharing and the more time you spend having a conversation with the person, the better your sales process goes.
Certainly the more you're going to connect with them individually. I agree with that.
Yeah, the reason that question stood out to me actually, and why I really liked it, is kind of, it's like having I like the idea of on the call, especially early on in the process when you're building rapport and trying to show that you are empathetic and understand what they're trying to solve for, not just sell them something. Replaying their words on the screen is one of the most powerful things that you can do. And you can only really do it if you care. You're actively listening, you're rewording, instead of just, oh, this was a great point, and saying it, writing it down just totally changes the vibe. So I love the idea. That's kind of what I'm trying to pick this question. That regardless of where you do it, that is like the most impactful thing I think you can do on one of the first calls, is writing down their thoughts in a different way and how you see it, and helping. I always love the idea of first calls, whether you call it demo qualification, helping someone rethink. This goes also back to Sahil, your example before, goes back to rethinking someone's way of solving a problem or understanding their problem better. I think that's actually the best thing that you can do on a first call, is not just offer them a solution to it. How can they understand the problems that they're frustrated by in a better educated way? So I think writing that stuff down will help them do that.
Yeah, I mean, that actually speaks to a fun, so everyone knows like the whole blue ocean, red ocean analogy. Everyone's familiar with that. I think everyone's familiar with, like, in sales, the RFP process, and how it's really great when the customer writes the RFP based on your solution and then puts it out to bid versus you being the third person to get the RFP. This is a different way of the same psychological trick, which is to say that someone comes to you and says, hey, we're having trouble with our paid advertising spend, and we're trying to figure out a way to optimize it. So they're thinking, okay, well, what I need is some sort of paid optimization tool. Let's say your company does creative or whatever, creative optimization. And getting them to go, no, the reason why my paid ads aren't working isn't because I haven't optimized the keywords, it's because my creative's bad. That's the context shift. That's the thing that great salespeople do all the time. Mediocre to average salespeople get lucky when the customer already comes in that way, and bad salespeople never do, which is they don't take the customer who has a generic problem, like, I need to convert a higher percentage of my paid spend or my boss is going to turn off paid and fire me, and get them to go, the way that is solved is through this lens, not that lens. And I think that, again, I mean, Ross, you are like one of the best salespeople I know, so I have little doubt that you can do this effortlessly, but I think it's an important thing to call out, because I think most salespeople don't recognize that this is your job in sales, it's not to uncover the pain. I think that's too simple. It's to translate the pain, right?
Yeah, reframe.
Yeah. I think that's the magic in sales, and that's what great salespeople are able to do again and again and again.
Totally.
And Ross, if I could add something to that really quick, I do think kind of going back to the idea of deck versus no deck, something that Kamlesh said in the chat that I completely agree with is the show and tell, or show don't tell, maybe rather. And Ross, what you said around showing them how, or describing to them how you can solve the product better. And I think, Mike, to your point, this is where the use of a Notion doc, the use of a deck, or at Navattic, we actually use customer examples, live customer examples, to say, for example, Mike, you told me your priorities were A, B, and C. We just had this great conversation. Rather than talking extensively about it, let me show you how other companies are solving this today and what this actually looks like. So the show and tell piece could be a deck, a Notion doc, it could be a demo space, interactive, whatever that may be. But I do think that it's incredibly powerful to say, hey, I hear you, I understand your problems, and one step further, let me show you how I've helped others actually solve that. It can be very powerful.
One final thing to add on that, it's also connecting, whether it's a deck, live to site, Notion, whatever format you're using, whether it's just, you on a Zoom with somebody, it's also important to understand why you got the conversation and talk about that, right? Like start with the reason why you're talking, or at least the reason why that person believes you're talking. If you start at that point, sort of irregardless of the format you're using, you're probably going to make some progress in discovering whether or not you have something viable for them, that you can actually put a solution in place and partner with them.
I love that.
Totally cool. Great Q&A from the audience there. To move off that for a second, back to our regular scheduled programming. We're actually going to combine number 2 and 3 here because we just had a great discussion on those. So the questions are going to be twofold. One's going to be about tactically how people are adapting their sales process to the modern buyers, to this idea of driving more, consultative selling, engagement, really digging into the problems. But first, what are the signals that a sales leader, a rep, or a founder would have that you do need to make this change, right? So yeah, first question, what are some of the signals that you might see or you've seen at your companies in the past that kind of, the real things that are happening day-to-day basis, whether the metrics or customer conversations or feedback from reps on the team? And then how do you, think about adapting your process or that then process to what you're trying to do now? Sahil, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this actually brings us really neatly into something that we didn't touch on the first question, but is a reason why I'm so bullish on what Accord does, which is one of the things that it is different in the modern buying process is that there's no longer a single buyer. I remember when I started selling in 2008, 2009, you could call the CMO of a company, have a conversation with her or him and get a deal done that day, the next day. It was pretty easy to do. Not easy, it was common to do. Let's put it that way. I think it's extremely uncommon today. I will pitch the CEO of a company and then have to pitch 6 more people at their firm in order to get consensus and buy-in. And I think another thing, back to my track of why I think we give too much credit to modern buyers and why we need to really take responsibility for what we do in the sales process. Modern buyers don't know how to get consensus and move things along internally. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you what happens all the time, including at that Civ Science example that we talked about earlier, where we were sold, but it took us months in order to actually sign the contract. And the reason it took months is because our VP of Eng was like, oh, I don't know when we have time to implement this. And, our VP of community was like, oh, I think I can handle this internally. Let's just use the human solution first so we don't delay the roadmap. And so even though I was sold and our VP of product was sold, it still took a long time in order to get consensus because internally there was a bunch of things that were happening that the salesperson had no idea what was going on. And I think the signal, so to answer the second part of the question, mm-hmm. is that your deals are taking forever. The signal is that you're talking to someone, they're excited, they want to buy, but ain't no contract getting signed. That's the signal. Is why are all my fucking deals stuck in opportunity 75% but not moving? Why is every close date being pushed off? And the reason why is because you are, and it's not about single, people multi-threading, single thread. No, that's too complicated. The person you're talking to, if they are senior enough, executive enough, you assume, oh, well, this person can get the deal done. They cannot. And your job is to kindly, gently, patiently, take that responsibility off their plate and become the person that sells it internally for them. If you ever want to have your deals get done faster, you can't just rely on them to tell their boss or tell their team or tell their peers. That's never going to work. So this is why I like mutual action plans and all the rest of it, because I think the sales process is now 2 steps. Step 1, sell the person. Step 2, person sells the rest of their company. And that second step of the sales process, most salespeople are not very good at.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really, really great point, especially around not just there are more buyers and all this stuff, but how do you actually accomplish that? You need to understand they have a day job on top of their, problem solving with the solution that you're talking about. How do you take as much you can off of their plate? Even if they could do it and they were good at it, they're not going to be quick to do it. They're not going to be able to drive the consent. hey, who are the people? How am I going to help you get this done? I think is such a key piece to that, right? It's not just arming them with the right information, et cetera. Yeah.
And Ross, to piggyback off that too, I
Yeah.
think something that we hear oftentimes too is it's not necessarily that they're bad at buying software. I think something we run into a lot of times is they've never done it before. So like, especially if we circle back to like the demographic where we're seeing younger and younger buyers, I will often ask at the, like whenever it makes sense in that conversation to say, what does this process look like for your team internally? Or historically, when you've bought software, what can you expect with A, B, and C? And I'm always surprised by how often the answer is, well, I don't know. Let me go find out. I'm not sure. And that tells me immediately, okay, this individual has probably never purchased software, at least at this company. And there's obviously procurement steps that we are all familiar with that they are just not yet. So in those scenarios, it's really, really helpful. And we can see it as an opportunity to say, okay, let me proactively provide A, B, and C. Or Ross, I can tell you for a fact that obviously us using Accord internally, it's really, really helpful to be able to start some sort of mutual action plan where you are basically showing them the steps and letting them fill in the blanks there. So I think oftentimes it's less of a they don't know or they're not good at it. It's more of a they just have never done it before.
Yeah. There's also some, Ben, I think to uncover that because Sahil, you're going on authority in the chat. I think it feels like ABC or 101 sales, but asking people, hey, the last time you purchased a solution like this, walk me through the process. And if they can't answer that, that sort of gets to this idea, Ben, that you're talking about, which is they've never done it before, or Sahil, to your point, they don't have the authority to do it. And so then you follow up on that is, hey, who's going to help you make this decision? And let's all get together and talk through it, right? You can do your best to try to control how your information is getting to them or how that sale is running by asking those questions and then helping them realize, hey, I don't actually necessarily know how to do this. And I might need this salesperson, this consultant's help to navigate the process internally.
Yeah, I think one of the most common things that we hear from our customers trying to up-level their processes and grow revenue is our buyers aren't great buyers, right? They're not the people with authority that are buying this new technology. There's a lot of new amazing tools that don't just sell to the same CTO or CIO or whoever it is, right? They're building products for design organizations like Figma. They're building products for product teams, like people that aren't traditionally buying all of the software. And I think helping them gain confidence in that and really give them the path. Hey, we work with, hundreds or dozens, whatever it is, of folks that are in your shoes, that are design leaders, whatever. We understand that you're typically not the people coming up with this ask. This is how we'd recommend you approaching this, right? Not just asking the questions. I think that's where a lot of people, where you move from like discovery to actually trying to get the deal done, that a lot of people fall off that haven't done sales for years, is the balance between asking questions, but also being very opinionated about the right way of doing things, right? It has to do with how does your company buy? How do you guys do this? Because that's totally different from company to company, but there's a right way of doing it. And we have that. We have thought a lot about how our customers have purchased before, when they've been successful, when they haven't. These are the people to loop in. This is how long it takes, being very, very specific about that. And then asking them, how does that work with you? If they haven't bought it before, they're going to say, yes, wow, you've done this before. We're just going to take that and do it again. Maybe they're more experienced and they say, totally hear you. That's how it normally worked at my last job or this thing. This is how it works differently here. Okay, let's open up that Notion doc and collaborate, or whatever it is, Accord, collaborate on how we're going to get this done. But I think it's that tough balance between discovery and reframing questions that we talked about at the beginning, and how do you be super explicit about the right way of doing this, especially for people that aren't buying software every day. So it's a tough balance, and that's where kind of the art meets the science of sales. Awesome. We have about 12, 13 minutes left. Let's look at some of the any questions that jump out at folks from the panel here that you want to dive into.
Maybe the interesting one is I do love the idea. Manfred here asked a question. What do CEOs do when they receive cold emails offering a free trial? Which I'm going to generalize that into like, how do you write a good cold email? It wasn't the question that you asked, but I think it's probably more broadly applicable, which is to say that writing good cold emails is such a lost art, because everybody got so excited about Outreach and SalesLoft and all these tools where you could click a button and send 100 emails, that people forgot that at the other end, there's a recipient, a human being, who opens, let's say on even a really shitty campaign, 20 to 25% of your emails get open. Let's just say, I mean, you hopefully it's higher, but 20, 25%, everyone can assume, is a mediocre to not so great open rate. If you send 100 emails, it's 20 to 25 human beings who have opened your email. Then I look at what response rates look like, or, response rates are like 1%. And the reason why that's happening to you is because you're sending really shitty emails that are super generic, and obviously like you've put some tokens here and there, and like you're never going to sell that way. So as, again, account executive at Bravado, I don't use a sales enablement solution. Not that I won't, I will use one eventually as we scale the business, but no member of the Bravado team, whether you're an SDR, an AE, whatnot, will ever be permitted to send a templated email to a prospect. I don't believe in it. I know people do. I know all the math and all this. Trust me, like I've built high velocity sales teams. It does not work anymore. It used to work. It used to work because buyers didn't know. Now everyone knows, right? Every buyer is familiar. This email is not for real. So you better write the email like as an art form. It better be super personal and thoughtful. And people will read them. People will respond to them. I tested this out recently by I created a fake profile for myself on LinkedIn with an SDR title and a different picture and a different name, and linked to it and started sending emails because there was an internal joke that like, oh, it was easy for me to sell because I was
because you're the CEO and founder.
Yeah, and they're like, and I was like, no, I was like, it's not because I'm a CEO, it's because I know how to sell. And so I created an SDR profile for myself, and I sent out 20 cold emails, and I got 11 meetings. And I was like, look, see, it's very possible to get 55% of people, but it was easy in the sense that I spent hours researching the people and the companies and like, looking at whatever, but like people don't do that. Everyone's just like, oh, I'm going to hit my activity volume. I'm just going to click here, click there. And I'll just be honest with you. That's a really good way to be on top of the leaderboard when it comes to activity and have your team miss revenue targets every quarter. So.
Yeah, well, it's a comment for you, Sahil, but also what I always say outside of just outbound, I think this applies for the entire like revenue organization, is the best sellers or the best performers have the fewest deals, but they work the hardest on the ones that they know are real, right? So you're doing the right research with the right people and investing your time the best way. But yes, we'll find out.
I was going to say real quick, Ross, Sahil, you're creating the bots that you're trying to get rid of on LinkedIn.
I'm sorry, I'm creating the bot.
I was joking. I was saying you're creating a bot that you're trying to get rid of, which you alluded to earlier.
That's right.
But piggybacking off that, Sahil, I'm really, really fascinated about that topic. We don't have to go too much of a tangent right now because it's something that's super top of mind for me and Navattic as we're scaling out the BDR org and outbound motion here. I 100% agree, and our data has seen the exact same thing. Like one of our BDRs, Kateri, she's an absolute killer, and she will send these like very hyper personalized emails and takes up a lot of time, but it gets a lot of good results. And then she's also running Apollo outbound campaigns in the background that are yielding nothing.
Yeah.
And it's just a really difficult question because when I'm having one-on-ones with her, she's like, well, I'm putting all these inputs in, but it makes more sense for me to spend time here because the Apollo stuff just is not working. So, but it is that same age old of like, well, is this going to scale? Am I doing enough? So Mike, I'd love to understand like how you guys are running that at G2 and maybe any recommendations you have for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best reps on our team, just echoing, they are doing highly personalized to the higher up individuals within organizations, right? And so what we have is sort of like a twofold approach. One, you are sort of like carpet bombing the world with your message. It's not necessarily going to yield result, but it will create awareness. And that's sort of the hope out of that. And then if we're trying to get, as an example, a CMO at a Fortune 500 company, you better believe that rep or their BDR, they are working on an email that is very targeted to that individual, understands what that person is after, and also, and this is, I think, a defining point, is very specifically calls out for G2, not just, hey, we have XYZ audience across our site, but very specific to your category. Here's what's going on in your category, and here's why you should care about it. And so they are making those very specific emails going out to, again, those people in authority. But then on the side, we are also running mass campaigns because we do want to create that awareness in the market.
That makes sense.
I would also say it's a little bit different. I think it depends on the stage of the company. I mean, G2 is a household name. You know, everybody knows G2. Not everybody knows G2, but in our world, a lot of people know G2. Sure. And so therefore, when you get an email from G2, it's less offensive than when you get an email from, you know, Bravado or something that you've never fucking heard of. And you're like, who are these people? Why did they send me an email? You know, et cetera. And I think that when the early days, you got to be like hyper personalized. As you start to build a brand, you can start to rely more on more templated stuff. I would say though that the templated stuff is really effective when it's a give, not an ask, right? You know, so like, I'll give you an example. We send templated emails too. I want to be super clear about this, but never for a prospect or a meeting. We'll send templated emails like, yo, we've got, here's a new salary guide we just created for 2022 comp bands, and we'll send it out to everyone, right? No ask. Right? It's just like send it away. There's no lead gen form. There's nothing. It's just like sending stuff out so people know us. And then of course we're tracking to see who's clicking and who's engaging and whatever on the back end. And then you know, surprise, 3 weeks later that person gets a personalized email, and then their likelihood to respond is much higher because like, oh, these are the people that sent me that cool salary guide. You know, so like things like that do work versus you know, trying to be like, hi, first name, I saw on insert social media site that you went to college. Would you like to talk about your security? Like, and I get like 25 to 30 of those a day.
Yeah, it's pretty
a lot.
That's not, when people say that, they're like, oh, people are shitting on salespeople because of that. Like, that's not sales to me. That's just your spam. It's not this world.
I mean, Ross, you should share your best practices on this stuff. You're one of the best salespeople I've ever met. Come on, what did you do in order to get through and, you know, crush it at Stripe?
What did I do different from other people? I think similarly to what we're saying, all the best salespeople, I think, lean more into the personal side of things. They're really good at process, but they deeply understand the people they're working with. So they build out these like efficient processes that they can then put in. Like, that's what I was saying, like in the chat, my best way of doing outreach or anything is I'm obsessed with text expander because I like having a template. So when I'm talking to someone and when I'm really writing and thinking, it's about the specifics. It's about them. It's about their problems. It's about their company. It's about what they're trying to solve. How do you speed up the data stuff? How do you speed up the templatizing? How do you speed up all of that? So you can really focus on the customer's problems and get creative. I think it was interesting. I did like a 360 review one time towards the end of Stripe. We actually got to include our customers. And I always thought, I was like, you know, again, being very creative with working with my customers, the one thing that everyone unanimously asked for was more personalization, more customization, more how do we solve these problems together in unique ways? And I think that's a huge takeaway is I think we get so caught up in the numbers in sales when it's at the end of the day, you can be the most efficient person by moving up the needle a bit in the close rates in those like tiny interactions and spending less time, you know, doing the stuff that is annoying. So I think that's my big takeaway is just going deep on the person, kind of what you're saying. But I do agree with the templatization with the process if done in the right balance, because that did save me a ton of time. So yeah. So my answer to our last question, which is, what's the most exciting shift we're seeing in buying today? What's the most challenging thing? I think one of the most exciting things that I'm seeing is, I think what we're talking about with like the mass campaigns and how sales is being done today, you actually have a massive differentiator if you're selling in the way that we're talking about. If you like, it blows my mind every time I actually get a great outbound email. I reply to all of them. Like it blows my mind when I go through a great sales process because it's so rare. Like you don't need to do anything crazy to differentiate yourself, I think, as sellers or as sales teams today, because the bar is so freaking low. So I think that's kind of my big takeaway. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is buyers really appreciate it. I think they appreciate it more than ever with where the bar is today with all of this automation. So curious to get, maybe we'll pass it over to Mike to get your thoughts and we'll hear, this will be the last question.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up.
What am I most excited about?
Yeah.
Well, I think with, you know, this idea of access, right? There's so much information on the internet. As people are, I'll speak to B2B software, as they're making decisions. We saw again in the buyer report that I linked, we saw 86% of B2B buyers are using, the internet, peer review sites, all of these kind of things. So it's great to see that what we are trying to sell, what we're trying to partner with sellers on, that's where buyers are today. So we're actually really excited about the access to information that's out there. And, when you see stats like 100% of the Fortune 500 has used G2 in the last year for a buying decision, that gets us really exciting and sort of validates what we're doing in the market. So that's very specific to G2, but that's what we're excited about.
Awesome. And Sahil and then Ben, you'll wrap it up. What are your thoughts, Sahil?
I mean, I think the thing I'm most excited about, I don't even know if it's happening yet. I guess the thing I'm most excited to see in many ways is a different type of person entering the sales workforce. I think that if you graduate from a top 25 university and are non-technical, you pretty much consider banking or consulting as the two non-technical pathways. Both industries are dying and suck. Sales is a much, much better pathway from a career, earnings, building a network, skill set, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Ross, shining example here of someone who started his career in sales and now is, founded his own company and is building things. And I know a bunch of other people that fit that mold. I think salespeople make the best CEOs. And so, I think it's an amazing pathway into entrepreneurship. The reason why people haven't gotten into it is because sales has historically been a really shitty job. Like, let's just call it what it is. Sitting in there making 100 cold calls and trying to con someone into buying a product. And, it's like I thought I was going to be a professional basketball player, but instead I went to Enterprise Rent-A-Car and now I got a job as a sales rep. Is like the pathway that everyone goes down, and like, I want to see amazing talent get into sales. I want to see us championing the profession. I want to see recognition that sales is consultative, that it is all of these things that Ben, you and Michael, you shared on this call. It's not the reputation that sales has. It's not what people think of when they think of sales. They still think of, unsubscribe. That's what sales is, and the further we can get away from that world and into the world that we're discussing on this call, I think the more upside there is for all of us. Rising tide lifts all boats and whatnot. So
I love that. Yeah. I love the mission that you're all on at Bravado to help do that. And Ben, what are you most excited about with the future of sales and buying?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it pretty quick because honestly, Sahil, I was just echoing a lot of things that you just said. I think with the access to information, prospects and buyers becoming more educated and efficient in their sales processes, it's sort of a double-edged sword for sales folks, right? It makes, number one, our job somewhat a little bit more difficult. If they're aware of more competitors, they have more access to information, but at the same time, it should make us better sellers, right? It should make us hyper-focus on our ICP, how we're different, what our product can do, be more product-focused, be more of that consultant, all these beautiful buzzwords that everybody always uses. But ultimately, ideally, to your point, Sahil, like rising tide raises all ships. Ideally, it is making all of the salespeople a little bit better. So a little bit of a fluffy, redundant answer to Sahil's, but it is sort of my sentiment on the topic.
Totally. I think it ties in well, just to like wrap up today's discussion, the things that we're talking about right now, that the bar is rising for sales. I think people aren't putting up with, like the jigs up with the automated LinkedIn, notes and all the emails and all this stuff. Like, you need to come with a deep understanding of your customers' problems. You need to be able to be that consultative civ science saleswoman that Sahil mentioned. And I'm excited about it. I think it goes well with raising the bar for what selling is today, and building back a lot of that trust that I think is eroded from. I mean, it makes sense. If you can get away with it and you can do a lot of stuff, like, that's what's going to be done. And that's just not the world in 2022. So I'm really excited to see how things shift this year and in the next couple. So yeah. Oh yeah. Mari just posted something important. If we didn't get to your questions, or you didn't catch everything, or you want to share this with your team, we'll send out a recording and we're going to do a mini blog post on some of the key takeaways and some of the awesome answers from the panelists. But firstly, Mike, Sahil, Ben, thanks so much for joining and sharing your thoughts and perspective on this. And audience, thanks so much for the super, engaging conversation and the questions.